Hello, welcome again to Smugtown Beacon Spotlight. I'm Chris Wilmot.
And I'm Aaron Wicks.
And thanks for coming back. This is our second show, and as you may know, our website, the smugtownbeacon.com, is based on this book by Kurt Gerling from 1957 called Smugtown, USA. And Aaron, I think you said it best, this is a gentle parody. Did you say something about this book on the website?
Well, it depends on who you are, but it's meant to be gentle but critical as well.
But we're both natives. We love our hometown. We love Greater Rochester. But certainly, to have a better democracy in this community, we have to sometimes go behind the scenes in public life and make sure that residents are getting the information they need to make good decisions. So along those lines, we have our theme today of the show is downtown redevelopment, revitalization. Our first guest, and I'll read her quick resume here, is Heidi Zimmer-Meyer, who is the president of the Rochester Downtown Development Corporation. Ms. Meyer is originally from New Haven, Connecticut. She graduated, she did her undergraduate work at the University of Rochester and did her graduate work at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Out of college, she worked at the Bureau of Indian Affairs in North Carolina. And then also she was special assistant to the state director at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, in Greensboro, North Carolina. And then, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, after that you came to Rochester and came back to Rochester and have been the head of the Rochester, president of the Rochester Downtown Development Corporation for how long now, Heidi?
Well, it's got to be over a decade.
Okay. Well, anyways, welcome, welcome, and thank you so much for coming.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
You want to go first, Aaron, or should I jump in?
Go ahead.
With the addition of Hart's Grocery Store over on that street, I can never think of the name of, next to the little theater.
Matthews. No, Winthrop.
Thank you, Winthrop.
Yeah, or Little Theater. And
are we finally getting the critical mass between Alexander Street and, let's say, Chestnut that we need to really revitalize the downtown? When I lived in Washington, D.C., things that were important to me in my neighborhood where I walked were a dry cleaner, a little grocery store, certainly an ATM or a bank. Do you think with the addition of this grocery store in the next several months that this is maybe either the final piece or one of the final pieces of the critical mass we need in the East End?
I think the whole discussion of retail is absolutely fascinating, and I'd say there are two ways to dice the conversation. The first one is that national retail experts will tell you that you need between 5,000 and 10,000 downtown residents before retail starts to get interested. And we're now over 6,000. So we've got the critical mass of the native population to this part of the city that's starting to mean that we've got retailers that are looking, and the first real evidence of that is Hart's Grocery Store. The other curious aspect of this is that there's a culture to the way people shop. And if you go just down the thruway, right and left, so to speak, to Buffalo and Syracuse, you'll find that those cities have developed urban retail very differently than we have. And in Rochester, we left urban retail a long time ago and went out to malls back in the 70s and 80s. And it caused the death of a lot of merchandise-type retail in the city. And if you go to Buffalo, there's an unbelievable amount of strips of high-end urban retail still very healthy in the city, miles of it. And when you go to Syracuse, there's a very healthy, high-end retail scene in their downtown, which has been active for decades.
Armory Square is one of those areas?
Armory Square, it's centered. We've got high-end men's store there. There's a ton of retail, and it survives because people patronize it.
Right.
Here, we stopped doing that. Even though we had really great retail at one time, people were just hightailing it out to Marketplace, and then when Eastview Mall opened. So our shopping habits have driven the way things have shaped in our retail environment. So what we're starting to see downtown with this emergence of the population that we have now is the grocery store. And we also know, and your next guest can talk more directly to this, that there's been a surprising level of retail interest in the Midtown block. And that is new. We haven't had that for 20 years. So this is, I think, something is cataclysmically shifting downtown.
Fantastic. Before I turn over to Aaron, I just want, for the education of our guests, of our viewers, define downtown. I always say, to me, it's always what's inside the inner loop, but I think that definition might have changed. Can you expand on that?
It's absolutely changed. Back in the 80s when I came up here from North Carolina, by the way, we looked at 8 cities in the Northeast and picked this one, and we've never looked back. So this is a very appealing place. It used to be that everything was the central business district and it was everything within the inner loop. And what's happened is that downtown definition is now blown out over the edges of the inner loop. It's picked up High Falls, part of Corn Hill. It's wrapped up around the Upper East End, Alexander Street area, and down into what is now being rebranded as Alexander Park, and back down through an edge of part of Monroe Ave and Wadsworth Square, back up to where Strong Museum and ESL are. So, and we're not throwing darts at a map. This is coming back from people in the marketplace that are saying, no, we're downtown. We're downtown. So it's fascinating to watch, but looks kind of like an amoeba shape now.
Thank you.
Heidi, I'd like to talk a little bit about the relative importance of retail and entertainment in downtown development, because there was quite a bit of discussion at one point about trying to locate a new performing arts center downtown as part of Renaissance Square, and then just as part of the Midtown project as a standalone. Mayors Duffy and Richards both insisted that Rochester Broadway Theater League pretty much demonstrate that all the money was there before they would get behind the project to support it. And there's even a story out there that Mayor Richards said that downtown nightlife isn't what draws people to live in a downtown, that entertainment events don't drive downtown growth. How do you see the importance of entertainment types of activities versus retail in cementing that population that has already chosen to live downtown?
I think they're integral, and they're integral for a couple of chief reasons. The first thing that needs to be said is that downtown's entertainment and cultural venues form an arts district that's the largest in the 9-county region. So this is the center of not just the city, but the county and 9-county region. This is a place where a lot of things happen. So I think that the entertainment and cultural kinds of venues draw people from all over. But it's also become part of that walkability aspect of what's attracting a lot of the people who are moving downtown. And this is not Rochester's story alone. This concept of walkability and kind of a culture-rich environment is what's drawing people into downtowns across the country, particularly in mid-sized cities. And there's a definite reversal in the pattern of how regions are developing that we're right now engaged in. A lot of people have said we're in the century of the city, that the last century was much about kind of centrifugal development pushing outward, suburban areas and exurban areas and highways and huge malls, and it was a very American pattern. What we're beginning to see in this century is it's starting to reverse and at least flatten, so that we're beginning to see our own population in the city, a lot of us believe, is bottomed out of its losses and is beginning to turn around, because we lost 120,000 people since 1960 within the city limits. And there are many of us watching the statistics who feel that might have bottomed out in the last half of the first decade of this century. So all of this is very inextricably bound as to why people see the environment as interesting enough to merit the kinds of rents that people are paying and the kinds of condo and townhome prices they're paying to live in Rochester's downtown, which is another amazing story.
Heidi, I'd like to talk about, we talked about retail before you did, that like many urban areas around the country, urban centers, the retail started leaving in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and went out to the suburbs. Another phenomenon I've noticed locally is that it seems like every time I turn around a Route 96 corridor, the area between Calkins Road and Lehigh Station and Henrietta, off West Henrietta Road, Greece, Webster, etc., office parks seem to spring up like mushrooms. And how does a downtown like Rochester compete with the suburbs? And you know, we certainly have our beautiful skyscrapers to show off, but how does our downtown compete with that?
The office market is soft in this region, and it reflects the fact that our regional economy needs to grow to soak up any new space. And what's happened downtown is really twofold. The first thing is that a lot of the buildings that no longer work in the office market are being absorbed by the residential market. So now 38 of them have been converted to housing. Those that are done and then in the pipeline, and they're filling like that. I mean, it's just incredible. So the supply is getting reduced. The other side of it is that we're finding that the office using businesses are coming back to downtown faster than we thought. We thought they would follow retail, and it's actually been the reverse, so that you have Windstream and Earthlink and ESL and D4, CGI, Brand Networks, companies that have chosen either to build a building downtown or to move in and expand wherever they're finding space. And so that whole story has changed quite dramatically. But I think it's an integration between creating a livelier, more vibrant downtown, and that's happening because of the residential market and what's going there. You now walk through downtown streets during the day and see people in sweats walking their dogs. And I've been down here 30 years, I've never seen that. So it's changing. And also the population is a mix of young people, students, young professionals, artists, along with very wealthy mid-career executives and retirees. So it's this crazy mix. It's a very Rochester story.
It's encouraging.
And in the couple minutes we have left, there's another Rochester story I want to touch on before we leave, and that's a sadder story. And that is, in 2014, we'll be celebrating, or not celebrating, but observing 50 years since the unrest of July 1964. There is a lot to celebrate. A lot of progress has been made, but there's still a lot of work to be done. These patterns of suburbanization and retail flight, I think we all would agree, connect with the story of race and people wanting to sort of be in more familiar settings or not interact with certain other folks. You've been involved in the local initiative Facing Race, Embracing Equity.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about what that means to you and how it connects with the work that you do?
It's a very direct connection for me. I will tell you also that 30 years ago when I came up to Rochester, I think we're far more racially and economically divided today than we were then. So that's point one. Point two is that downtown Rochester belongs to everyone. And that includes urban school kids, it includes the homeless guy down the street, it includes wealthy retirees and people from the suburbs and people from Toledo. It is the place where it's the heart and the center of the region. And so you've got to be aware, this isn't a deal where you just want to push everybody you don't like out. So downtowns have a very special role to be the place where everybody comes together in a community. So what I do on a day-to-day basis is very much about that. I think the Facing Race, Embracing Equity, and I think it's becoming kind of a movement, is going to have to extend very broadly throughout the community. And if people don't care about the human side, they need to start thinking about the impact on the economy. We can't grow this region with new companies and new jobs if we're leaving that much human capital on the table. So we've got a lot of people who aren't plugging into the economy. It's the tale of two Rochesters. And we have a frighteningly alarming situation that's developing. And we can't let it get any further. There's a lot of evidence and research on cities reaching tipping points like Detroit, where all of a sudden you're on the edge of the cliff and you fall off and you can't get back up. Yeah. And we, in some measures, have already hit that point. And we can't, particularly with the history of social justice in this place, we can't allow that to happen. So there's a human story of it, which is, to me, the most compelling. But the other side of it is the economic story. Yeah. We can't move this region forward without bringing everybody into the economy.
I hate to end it here because we could talk about this for 45 more minutes, but I want to thank Heidi Zimmer-Meyer, who's the president of the Rochester Downtown Development Corporation. Thank you so much for coming, and maybe you'll come back sometime, I hope.
I'd love to. Yep. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thanks. And we'll be right back.
Smugtownbeacon.com, your local political watchdog. Are you mad as hell? And are you tired of being unemployed or underemployed? What do you think? Smugtownbeacon.com, where free speech is alive and well.
Hi, welcome back to Smugtown Beacon Spotlight. In our second segment, we're joined by Larry Glazer, the CEO of Buckingham Properties. Mr. Glazer was born in Mount Vernon, New York, attended high school and college in Buffalo, received a master's degree in finance from Columbia University, worked for several years in the 1970s as the CEO of Great Lakes Press, where he gained some experience in the private sector. And when that business was sold in 1983, he was able to focus more on his property management company that he had founded back in 1970, Buckingham Properties. Since that time, Buckingham Properties has become one of the largest property owners in the city of Rochester, owns or manages over 50 properties throughout the area, totaling over 9 million square feet. Beyond that, Mr. Glazer is also a very active member of the community, not just on the development side, but also serving on a number of corporate and not-for-profit boards. So if our first guest, Heidi Zimmer-Meyer, knows quite a bit about downtown development, Larry Glazer is clearly a clear rival for that knowledge as well. And we're happy to welcome him to our show today.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I guess we'll start out with, kind of an obvious question. You have a lot of exciting projects in the hopper that you're working on. Midtown Tower, I know you and I think Bob Morgan just acquired the Xerox Tower within the last several months. Also, Alexander Park, which I think is the old Genesee Hospital. What's the most challenging at the moment? I mean, what are you most focused on?
Well, what we've done is we've taken 3 development projects that we're working on all within the city, and we've sequenced them from which one is going to start first and which one has more problems. Right now, we are focused very heavily on Midtown Tower revitalization. We have spent about 1.25 years doing engineering plans, drawings, designing, redesigning, and yet redesigning again as market conditions have changed, and we've been getting input and feedback from the community and from potential tenants. Having said that, we expect to be putting trailers on site within a matter of a couple weeks and going in for our building permits within about another week. We're wrapping up our financing and expect to start construction no later than May 1st.
The steel that I see in front of, just to the north of Midtown Tower, that's next to the new Windstream building, is that part of the redevelopment of the actual tower itself, or am I mistaken?
Well, actually, it's a convoluted answer. It was part. The original design, yes, that was part. We were going to take the old atrium of Midtown and turn it into a 3-story entry lobby. But when we hired our engineering firm to go through all their due diligence, we discovered that this standalone building was once part of a larger mall that had structures on both sides of it. Hence, it has no wind load capacity. As soon as you put walls on it and a wind comes over, it's going to topple right down. So we went back to the drawing board, and the end of the day is we have to remove all that steel that's there, right down to the basement, right down to the base, and replace it with all new steel properly designed to handle wind load. So that was about $1.5 million surprise that we weren't expecting.
That's a big surprise.
And we get back right where we started.
Yeah.
This is the type of things that you come across in redevelopment of older buildings, especially when they've taken them apart partially and you want to put them back together again. So that's one of several surprises that we received.
Larry, everyone's got an opinion about how the downtown should look, how it should grow, what works, what doesn't work. From your perspective, what's the greatest misconception that is out there as people talk about how to grow our downtown, how to develop it and attract business?
Well, the greatest misconception that I have seen for years in Midtown Rochester, Center City, is that of safety. Downtown Rochester, to me, is one of the safest areas there are. Okay, now of course there are pockets and there are incidences that occur, but the city is very focused on removing those issues, and I believe downtown Rochester is very safe, or I wouldn't be working there. We wouldn't be investing and developing money the way we're planning on doing in downtown Rochester. Once you're done with that, I think the problem is who's going to be first? Which are the retailers or major office players that are going to be the first guys to step in and say, we believe, we are convinced that you are correct, we want to be part of the solution. And it is actually occurring. We are working with people who have not been downtown or are not in the Rochester area who have said, you know, this is a good midpoint between Greece and Pittsford. We can cover a lot of rooftops in this area and get a lot of potential business. So we are seeing good activity now.
In your mind, is it, pardon me, is it more the challenge, or is it the kind of an idealistic moral imperative to focus so much of your efforts on the city of Rochester, particularly downtown, as opposed to where a lot of developers go, the Route 96 corridor, or Henrietta, Greece, Webster? What is it about urban centers that you like so much that makes you believe in them?
One is the challenge. You know, it's development is not easy. Ground-up development, suburban development, city development, everything has its challenges. But what's nice about downtown is you are actually, in many cases, recreating, and you're doing it in a way that people really appreciate. It is much more difficult, in my opinion, to redevelop a building, because first you have to take it apart, figure out what you have, and then you have to figure out how to put it back together. Some of the easiest projects that we build is Somebody wants a drugstore, somebody wants an industrial building. You take a piece of land, you design it, you permit, you finance, you build it, and you lease it. Okay? These are all way more complicated. Tighter environment, lots of people to satisfy at the same time, but when you're done, it feels great.
You talked earlier about the sequencing of projects. Our previous guest talked about how retail and entertainment are tightly integrated. And let's throw like commercial office space into that too. Is there a sequence to how those elements fall into place, or do they really feed into one another in ways that we can't manage? We just have to be prepared to deal with them.
There is an old axiom in real estate that retail follows rooftops. So the first thing you want to do is get residential momentum going, and that is clearly occurring. I mean, we don't own a lot of units, but we have several hundred units, 200-300 units in downtown Rochester, and they're full. And there is not a lot of vacancy. Fellow landlords say the same thing. They're all busy. Rents are stable or going up slightly. So the prospect, and there's a lot of projects that are being worked on right now. So that augurs good for the residential. Now the trick is to find those brave retailers who say, I see this, I can understand what's going on. If we look at Rochester, it's a microcosm of other cities that are ahead of us in the redevelopment curve. If you go to cities like Syracuse or Buffalo, they're years ahead of us, in my opinion. Now there's reasons for that, but regardless, we're at the cusp, and I do believe that there's a long way to go for the center city redevelopment.
We're still a car culture. Gas is $3.50 a gallon, $3.75. Maybe when it gets to be $8 or $9 a gallon, people will rethink their commuting through the RTS bus system. In some metros, you have commuter rail. We can't have that here. We're too small, I think. But how do you compete with, let's say, a Pittsford Plaza, or let's say some of the big retail boxes in Webster, where even though it's not free technically because the cost is built into the lease and then passed on to the customer, how do you compete with open air, apparently free parking in the suburbs when so much of downtown, either meters or garages, are going to charge? Is that, in your mind, is that a false problem, or is it something that really needs to be addressed to bring more of that retail down?
I believe parking is the single greatest issue redevelopment has in downtown Rochester. This is a culture of free parking. People compare everything to suburbs, where you can get, in effect, no metered parking. I have been to other cities. As recently as 2 weeks ago, I was in Charlottesville, Virginia, looking at a development very similar to Midtown's redevelopment. They built a parking mall, they built a 10-plex movie theater, they have retail stores in this urban environment. They built this massive parking garage, no charge. We are developing in Florida, in a city called Lakeland, Florida. The downtown fathers there took and removed all parking meters from the streets and from the parking garages. These cities are thriving. Now, I don't know that our business climate will allow that, but I can tell you that is a real problem. So we struggle with that all the time.
And just to wrap up, our previous guest talked about the longstanding problem of race and how that has been a challenge, particularly for Rochester, as we enter the 50th anniversary of the riots of July 1964. How do you see those sorts of issues being addressed by a community that, let's be honest, has struggled with dealing with them? And here we are on the cusp of really seeing a resurgence in our downtown, but we're still grappling with these sort of shadows of the past. How do you see us moving forward past those?
I must be getting old or something, because I don't see it as a real severe problem, okay? I look at people as people. I treat people as people. They're either good people or they're bad people. I believe more and more so that is what is occurring. Yes, there are socioeconomic issues to be dealt with, but that is something that occurs everywhere all the time. Now, it so happens, and I don't mean to pick on a place like Pittsford because I grew up there. I mean, I spent years living there, and they have different issues than we have in an urban environment. But I think the beauty of our urban environment is the fact that we can have a diverse microeconomy in the downtown area. And I think that adds to the value, that adds to the culture, it adds to the richness of what you experience here. It's sort of like living in New York, where you have one street that's very, very wealthy people, and then the next street is ready for rebuilding, and the next street may be something else. And people accept that. It's part of the urban environment. And if you don't like it, then you shouldn't live in an urban environment.
I think we have about 2 minutes left at the most. Just to shift gears a little bit, the Xerox building, at least when you look at the exterior of the building, appears to be in good shape. Now, I'm not an expert, of course, I'm not an engineer, but besides the acquisition of the building, I read an article where I think Xerox committed to 8 more years, if I'm not mistaken. Are there any new, exciting, interesting, different tenants that you are at liberty to talk about? What's the vacancy rate in the building?
Well, the good part is you are correct in everything you've said, but Xerox's tower is occupied by Xerox, and it will continue to be occupied by Xerox for a minimum of 8 years, and we hope a lot longer. The challenge here is how to take this building with this tenant and integrate it into a redevelopment of downtown so that it's not an isolated environment. Years ago, there used to be a restaurant called the Shakespeare's there. There used to be an ice skating rink. Yeah. There's a 700-seat movie theater there, all of which are unused. Our goal is to figure out how to take this and make it a community asset, integrated in the revitalization of the urban area of downtown.
Okay. I think we're just about done. Any last questions, Aaron?
No, that's some exciting information about the Xerox Tower. I think we all look forward to that type of project moving forward.
And if you'd agree to come back, Larry, I'd love to talk more about Alexander Park. I know you moved your headquarters, if I'm not mistaken, over to Alexander Street.
We did.
And I was born at Genesee Hospital, so I have a special affinity for that area. Okay. So I'd like to hear, if you'd come back sometime, more about that development. But I want to thank you very much for coming.
Be my
being
pleasure.
On our show.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Aaron, thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
Okay.
And I guess that concludes, it does conclude our second show. And thanks to, again, Heidi Zimmer-Meyer, the president of the Rochester Downtown Development Corporation, and Larry Glazer, the CEO of Buckingham Properties. So we'll see you next time back in the spotlight.